Hey, thanks for joining me. It's time to hit the road. One mid-May morning, my wife and I left the low-hanging fog in Santa Rosa and made our way up to the clear blue sky above Spring Mountain Road. Smith-Madrone Vineyards and Winery sits high atop the mountain and features a spectacular view of Napa Valley. When we arrived, the valley down below was still opaque with the rising fog that eventually burned off to expose the vineyards and farmland. Stuart Smith founded Smith-Madrone in 1971. His brother Charlie joined shortly thereafter. As you look out over the rolling patches of vineyard, it's hard to imagine it was covered with forest when Stu first arrived, which led me to ask, why did you choose this location, and how old were you? Early 20s?
Actually, I was 22. I was young. The reason I came here is that one of the fundamentals in wine that I strongly believe in, and that is, the old saying, Bacchus loves the hills.
Bacchus is the Roman god of agriculture and wine.
And that's important because you can't make good fish from 4-day-old fish. You got to have great ingredients, and making great wine requires great grapes. And I believed then, as we still believe today, that the best grapes come from the mountains. Now, that doesn't mean that we're denigrating the valley floor. There can be some really badly grown grapes in the mountains. But we think overall the best grapes come from the mountains, and there's some lovely wines that come from the valley, mostly from the benchlands, which is kind of a mini mountain in the valley.
Now, Charles, I guess you were bouncing around for a while trying to figure out what you wanted to be when you grew up before joining Stuart up here.
I was teaching 6th grade the year before I came here.
Charlie was also a probation officer, a furniture mover, a taxi cab driver, and a top croquet player.
I was teaching a bunch of savages, and, I don't know, pounding steaks seemed like a more attractive alternative. Whatever.
You were getting ready to pound something, huh? And you thought probably better off pounding steaks than...
No, I think it was a clear case of the train was about to leave the station without me, and I thought that wasn't a really great idea. Right.
So I understand Charles, you're more the winemaker, but Stuart, you have a master's in enology and viticulture at UC
I did my
Davis.
master's work out there. I never finished my degree. My only claim to fame is I was the first teaching assistant for the department. But I did end up teaching for 10, 12 years.
Yeah, you taught at the Santa Rosa JC?
Santa Rosa JC, yeah.
So why are you letting this croquet playing teacher make wine?
I think in some ways I ended up liking being outdoors more. He's more of the cave dweller. And as we spoke a little earlier, neither of us get out of bottling. Neither of us want out of harvest. And we taste wine and come up with blends until, we don't come up with the blends until we're both happy with it. And so it's just it just seemed like one of those things that happened.
You just mentioned something a few minutes ago about your decision process here. So when you make blends...
Yeah, the remark is sometimes visitors ask us what our process is around here and how we come up with blends and things like that. And I laughingly, but it's true, tell them that Stuart and I are like the two houses of Congress. If we don't agree, nothing happens, period.
Fortunately, unlike our current Congress, they eventually form an agreement and make the blend. As far as their vineyards are concerned, they both agree on dry farming.
Oh, absolutely. The North Coast, Napa, Sonoma County, we're never going to compete on quantity. Napa produces only 3.5% to 4% of all the grapes from California. We have to compete on quality. And when you dry farm, the berries tend to be smaller, so you have a greater skin to juice ratio, and the skins are where all the flavors are. So you inherently have a more flavorful grape. I also think that the vines mature in a better way than when you irrigate. The vines sense nature, and they change from a vegetative state of growing naturally into a ripening state. And when you irrigate, you push that further and further back into the fall. And I think also in a funny way, you're mucking with Mother Nature, because the vines, I believe, come to a symbiotic relationship when they're dry farmed. And that is that they sense how much water there is, what the climate is, what the preordained vintage. And when we dry farm, we get better quality grapes, more consistent tonnage, and the vines are able to last well into the season, better than a lot of cases than in the valley floor. And I remember when we had our last really big drought, which was in the late 80s, we'd drive through the valley floor, and some of these vines were just crapping out. They were losing it. And our dry farm vineyards were just honking along. They were doing great. And I really am, and there's starting to be kind of a recognition. A few of us are pushing hard that people need to look at dry farming, and I'm not saying that they have to absolutely become crazed zealots of dry farming, but they need to move toward that direction so that they minimize the water and get the vines back into kind of a more natural.
But you also have the luxury of some complex soils here that are pretty deep, considering you're on a mountaintop. And
yeah, well, I think we have great vineyard soils. We're on what's called Aiken-Stody clay loam soils. It's the volcanic soils, and so it's great vineyard soil.
That's Stuart Smith of Smith-Madrone Vineyards and Winery. If it sounds like they've been on the mountain together for too long and crafting all kinds of crazy blends, you may be surprised to learn that they've made Wine and Spirit magazine's top 100 wineries of the world list 4 out of 5 times in recent years. That is quite respectable. Up next, I talk with Charlie about the distinctive wine he's crafting when I continue on the Wine Road. Hey, here's a thought for you to consider. If you're enjoying today's podcast, you can join my community on Patreon. And with a small $1, $5, or $10 monthly subscription, you can continue to keep me on the wine road to bring these interesting people to you and more frequently. The time I have to spend on my day job is diminishing as I put the increasing effort into what is basically a hobby that ends up as a radio show and podcast. But people all over the world are downloading it, and I'd love to continue doing the podcast. If you go to patreon.com/onthewineroad, you can learn more and see the rewards I offer, which will get greater as time goes on. That way you can meet more of these winemakers and hear them share their stories, which I believe inspires you to explore and learn more about wine. I really appreciate your consideration. Thank you. That's Patreon. patreon.com/onthewineroad. Now, let's continue at Smith-Madrone Winery. Charlie was just about to tell us about the wine he makes.
Well, okay. We make 3 of the 4 noble grapes, right? The 4 noble grapes are Cabernet, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Riesling. We actually took a run at Pinot Noir for about 10 years, not very successfully.
That's a long time for a run.
Well, you got to give it a chance, for goodness sake. We grow grapes that we think do very, very well in our particular spot here.
You also have a Cabernet and Cab Franc blend.
The Cabernet Franc is a fairly recent addition to the list. I mean, I think 2001 was the first year that we actually blended it in. It's all part of the whole notion of making the wine better and better.
More complex.
Yeah.
And I'd say our as I like to say, and Charlie can chime in, our overarching philosophy of wine is to get the vintage into the glass of wine. Balance, elegancy, sophistication are all real nebulous terms, but we think they're important. And I guess, I don't know if you agree with this, Charlie, but there's this kind of raging controversy in red wines. And you've got the people who like the really ripe grapes, and you got the people who like the kind of, for lack of another word, underripe grapes. And I kind of think of us as kind of like Goldilocks. You got grapes that are really ripe, you got grapes that are really underripe, you got grapes right in the middle, and that's for us. We like that kind of European balance of what we were talking about.
Yeah, in some ways, we're sort of cranky old white guys who are still, making. We're making old school, what we think of as old school wines with, and I'm pretty sure Stuart would agree with this, wines with finesse, with balance, wines that taste good, that go well with food, wines that have longevity built into them, and wines that in a lot of ways are quite traditional.
Well, you've been at it long enough that you guys are now back in fashion again with that style.
Actually, for a while it felt like we were like the tribe out in the desert wandering around for 40 years, and it was lonely. But inherent in this whole concept is that we make wine for us.
So you're appealing to the cranky old white guys? Is that who you're looking for?
Well,
that's actually not true. Right. Yeah. Our style of wine, I think, is increasingly popular among the new wave of wine drinkers. Much to our surprise and gratification, really, young wine drinkers in their 20s and 30s, seem to really appreciate our wines. I think it's a question of what's old is new again.
Right.
And
you're hip.
The more traditional.
Does that mean wingtips are coming back?
Yeah, exactly. We're pleased with that. Right.
And I would say that there is, I think, room for everybody. I think what's happened in the past is that there was only room for the one style. And now we have the ripe style, the less ripe style, the middle style, and I think now people have the opportunity to taste them all and be able to make their own decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Well, everybody has a different palate anyway, so you can't please everyone with the same kind of wine.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, wine should be fun, and certain people like big alcoholic wines. Certain people like way more acidic wines. Some people like that kind of balance in the middle. That's where we are. But that doesn't mean that these others are wrong. We just don't. Those aren't my favorite.
Speaking of being cyclical, you said there was a vineyard planted here in the 1800s. But in the modern era, were you the first ones to have a vineyard up here on Spring Mountain?
No, there were some old vineyards. Fritz Maytag had purchased a vineyard from Herman Hummel that went back to the pre-Prohibition days. Jerry Draper had a vineyard that was pre-Prohibition. As far as wineries were concerned, Stony Hill on Spring Mountain is probably the oldest operating. We were the second or third wineries to come in. What's also kind of interesting is that in 1971, 72, we can't count 30 wineries that existed in the valley. It was a very small provincial industry, and it's all changed completely since then. Now we have to compete on an international basis. Little wineries like us, most people don't understand. If you're a gas station, a hardware store, a dry cleaning store, your sphere of influence, your market area is probably done in, square blocks or a square mile or 2 or 3 or 4. A little winery like us that produces a couple thousand, 4,000 cases, we basically have to be a little Procter and Gamble because we sell in 31 states, we sell in 5-6 countries. When you do your marketing and public relations, sales, you're really spreading across the world. And so even though we're in a very humble little building here, we have to have a pretty sophisticated marketing program or we're not going to survive. Yeah. There's kind of a funny little saying that started up in the Napa Valley recently, and that is the billionaires are driving out the millionaires. And
it sucks to be a millionaire anymore, doesn't it?
It does. Well, and what's happening is that all of these people are coming in with all this money, and they think wine business is glamorous, but it's hard work. And fundamentally, if you don't like people, you shouldn't be in the wine business. And a lot of these people, these titans of industry who have made beaucoup bucks in their other places, they come here, they're going, what do you mean I got to talk to people? What do you mean I got to go out and sell my product? It's like if you don't like doing it, you're in the wrong business. Because I think ultimately wine is a social beverage. We all know liquor's quicker. But the great thing about wine, and for me anyway, is that you get to play in dirt, and then you get to drink your product on a lovely, elegant, dining room table with friends and people, and you get conversations going, and it makes the world a nicer place to live in.
Stuart made a comment about playing in the dirt. There's a way in which, if you think about this from a certain angle, a vineyard and a winery are like a really giant kid's toy, right? Right.
Splashing around in the
Well, there's for people with a certain bent, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in an outfit like ours, where you've got a vineyard where the winery is in the middle of the vineyard. There's a lot going on, and it keeps you occupied.
Especially when you throw in skeet shooting and things of that nature.
Absolutely,
yeah,
no question.
Well, and I still turn wrenches. I'm a wrench turner. I probably know more about our 1958 TD662 series crawler than just about any other machinery or thing on the property. I mean, I've wrenched on that.
It's a tractor for you folks who don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
See, I misunderstood. I thought as a wrench turner you were doing that for sales. Yeah. Buy a wine.
No. Wrench, like as in tools, ratchets and combos and anyhow. And I think Charlie's right here in that the day is always varied, and it's a different deal. But if you don't like sitting on tractors, and if you don't like being in the dirt, and if you don't like being in the outdoors, or as Charlie would more or less be a cave dweller, you shouldn't be doing this stuff. I mean, making wine is we work 6 days a week, and during harvest we work 7 days a week for probably 5, 6, 7 weeks at a crack.
12 hours, 16 hours a day.
Well,
lifestyle.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, and you have to be committed to it, and if you are, then it's a great way to spend your life. But if you think you're going to come into it from outside and show a bunch of agricultural hicks how to do it, probably you're going to, after 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 years, go, this is the stupidest industry I've ever been in. You were talking about teaching. When I was teaching back in the 70s, I said, look, if you want to make money, go buy a McDonald's or a couple McDonald's, and you can retire the Bahamas in 4, 5, 6, 7 years. But I know wineries that after 20 years, the people that own the wineries are feeding the wineries instead of the wineries feeding the people. And that's one of the differences with us, is that our winery feeds us.
I mean, Stuart and I have been here for a long time now, and we've seen, interestingly, sophisticated and large corporate entities come and go because they get burned by the wine business.
Just this late winter, a New York Stock Exchange company had been in the wine business for 4 or 5 years and left, having lost $120 million of their investment. So, I mean,
This is not the first time this has happened, okay? It happens over and over. It looks easy from the outside. There's an analogy that's really quite apropos. No, I'm going to tell it. Good. Right, right. And it's like Edgar Swan, sailing serenely across a quiet pond. That's the image that the wine business presents. But underneath, those little feet are working like mad. Okay. Truth of the matter is, it's hard work. It's kind of tricky, and it's really probably not for everybody. Right.
You guys, I can just picture you standing on the edge of the mountain over there, in your grassy knoll, looking down at the valley and just shaking your heads. Huh?
We would never admit to that. No, but it's also a very friendly business.
Definitely.
Or it used to be anyway. The advent of a lot of corporations coming in and buying it has changed it a little bit. But deep down, it's still a very friendly, competitive. We all compete very hard on wine quality, and we also all mostly help one another to do better and advance. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the California wine industry, is that we are all imbued with this idea of helping our neighbor succeed, because if they can succeed, that makes it easier for us to succeed. And that may change in the future, but it's been there for the last 45 years anyway.
I hear that sentiment often, and I'm glad most feel that way. Next time you're in the Napa, Sonoma area, take a drive from the valley and wind your way up to the top of Spring Mountain and enjoy the view and the wines from Stu and Charlie at Smith-Madrone Vineyards and Winery. It's rustic, but it comes with no pretensions. Call ahead so they know you're coming. Their website is simply smithmadrone.com. That wraps up this podcast. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at jdwineroad. I'm on Facebook, and there's so much more at onthewineroad.com. I hope you can join me next time. I'm Jeff Davis.